Hello! I've just received this box in the mail. It is an entire watercolor set by the company MEEDEN. Let's get it open right now because I absolutely need to see what's in here, and I'm sure you do too. Let's get into it! It's not just one item, there are quite a few pieces in here, and it's really heavy. That's due to this particular box, which is the heaviest bit in there. I think I'll take everything out of the box first and arrange it neatly on the table so we can just see everything together. My desk isn't quite large enough to fit everything, so you're going to see my little pen stand over to the side here. Just ignore that. But here are the 4 things that were in the box. I've known about MEEDEN for many years. I've actually bought a few things by them, and when they sent me an email to ask if I wanted to try some of their products, I jumped at the chance because I've been really intrigued by some of the other things they've been releasing lately. So MEEDEN are, at least in Australia, really easy to find on Amazon, and they also have their own website, which I have discovered they do free shipping to Australia as well as other countries, so that is really fantastic, and their prices are very reasonable for their products, so I'm curious to know if they're actually any good. They also sell these metal tins, which I have numerous ones of, and they are perfectly fine. A lot of companies sell these tins, and these ones are the same quality as any other tin I've tried. So here are some of my core paints in one of the MEEDEN tins, and I also have a large one which I've got my Daniel Smith paints in, and I've taken out that flipper bit because that always drives me mad, but those are my Daniel Smith paints. And I'll be linking everything in the description below so you can check them out. Let's get to opening these products and taking a closer look. Alright, first up we've got the porcelain brush wash bowl. 2 Wells hand glazed pure white. Wow, that is really big. I like that a lot. It's so heavy too. Gosh, that's got to weigh close to 1 kilo, I reckon. That is so solid, and I love that it's split into 2 bowls because then you can have 2 lots of water. One of them you wash your brush out, and then you have a nice clean rinsing water on the other side. It's perfect. And if you don't use it as a water dish, it would probably work quite well for holding pens or something like that. So it's got a few uses I can see in the studio. Next is the watercolor paintbrush set with 10 pieces, water collected new tech, soft strokes, no hair losing. Okay, this is the range of brushes on the side, and if I get the box open, well, they're nice. They look really pretty. I love that blue to white ombre effect. That's gorgeous. They are definitely synthetic. When I'm painting, I do use synthetic brushes, but I also do quite like to use natural hair brushes, as I've probably mentioned in the past. But synthetic brushes have come a long way, and they are usually a lot better than they ever used to be. This looks like a quite nice range of different sizes. There's a few flat ones, and then I've got round brushes here with a nice tapered point, and then there's also one fan brush, which I don't have too many of these, so I'll have to see if I can make some effects with it. Although mine's got a couple of loose strands here, I'm really hoping those will come together once I get water on them. Overall, that's a really pretty looking set of brushes, I have to say. Really aesthetically pleasing. Next up is a block of watercolor paper, and it is 100% cotton. I am so happy about that. I really don't enjoy getting cellulose paper in these sorts of packs because that wood pulp paper just isn't anywhere near as good as cotton, so I'm really excited that they've actually included full 100% cotton pad of paper in a size 10 by 7, and it's got 20 sheets in 300 GSM. Okay, when I first saw this, I actually thought the paper was green, and I'm going, what? But actually this is a cover paper, and the watercolor paper is a nice looking white there. So that is glued down on all sides with that tiny bit up the top. And it's glued down so that when you paint on it, the paper doesn't warp. And that's the whole idea of a cotton block. I have used them before, not that often. I tend to go just for pads of paper and loose watercolor sheets. And the best way to get this peeled off is to use a palette knife of some description. I've got this big one, and I also have a small one, so I'll muck around and see which one is going to be better. I actually think the small one will be more precise, so I'm going to try that. And you just slot it in there. That's the only bit here which is unglued, and then you just gently slide the knife around to take the piece of paper off. This is coming off really easily with this palette knife. It could also be because it's a very thin bit of paper. There we go. I'll just take that out the way, and we'll have a look at the cold press texture. Yeah, it's got quite a texture there, if you can see that, so I'll be really curious to paint on this. We'll be doing that very soon, but last of all we need to get to what is kind of an important part of the set, and that would be the paint. And here it is, a 24 colour watercolour paint set. Apparently high extensibility, bright colours, versatility, and non-toxic. And this is a really nice box, I have to say. I like the decoration and the simple primary colour design on it. That's quite eye-catching and modern. So I'll just take the lid off, and it's all wrapped in plastic. The tubes look pretty big. They are 12mm tubes now that I'm looking a little more closely. So I'll just get that plastic off quickly and we can take a closer look at the tubes themselves. It's a fairly simple design, but on here it does have the name of the colour, also the pigment, and possibly its light fastness. This little box here will indicate whether the paint is transparent or opaque. In this case it's half and half, so semi-transparent, semi-opaque. Always with the white paint, although it says titanium white, which I'm quite happy about because that box is fully opaque, so I have hopes that this might be a half decent white paint. And then we've got lemon yellow, pale yellow, gamboge, yellow ochre, orange yellow, scarlet red, vermilion, crimson red, rose, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine and Prussian blues, pale green, sap green, deep green, phthalo green, violet, brilliant purple, burnt sienna, raw burnt umber, and black. Not a bad looking set. It's got quite a variety in each colour range. It's what I'd consider a pretty standard colour palette for something in the 24 set range. So according to the information that I received from MEEDEN, this is designed to be a starter set for beginners, and the set is focused on delivering value for their cost. They also gave me some information on the paints. They said that the pigments are of student level quality and the paper is produced by the same manufacturer as Baohong, but it's more the academic or student level. I'd be curious to try this because I have used Baohong paper, which is the professional grade, and that is beautiful paper. I've really liked it. The idea is that a beginner would purchase this set and have just about everything they need. It says on the description everything you need, but I do have to disagree because there's one important thing that is missing from this, and that is a palette in which to put the paints, because these paints are in tubes, so they need to go somewhere that you can squeeze the tubes out into something else. It would be great if the set had come with some kind of palette, and for example there is this tin here, and this would have enough half pans in here for all of these tubes. If they added it to the package and maybe charged a bit more, I think that would be worth it. Maybe just even a cheap plastic palette just to get you started. I've got an example here. This one is not really for 24 colours, but you can squeeze your paints into those. And another alternative would be maybe 2 of these, which hold 12 paints each. I did consider filling another tin like this with these paints, but now that I've realised they're student grade, and I'm not sure how good of a quality these paints are, I tend to use the tin for my professional grade paints. So I think I'm just going to make use of this one. If I put a couple of drops in here, then I'm going to get 20 paints into these areas, and then I'll just squeeze 4 more into those. It will do for the purposes of demonstration in this video, I think. While I'm at it, I took the time to fill this up with water, and boy, that gets heavy when it's filled, so that is definitely something to keep on your desk rather than traveling with. I also spent some time rinsing out all of these brushes so they're nice and soft now without any of that glue left. And if you are a beginner, I highly recommend throwing these little plastic doohickeys out. Don't try to put them back on the brushes once you've taken them off. Just get rid of them. They're not worth keeping. I found this wooden soap dish a while ago at a market, and it makes an excellent brush stand, so I'll just pop all those there for now. Finally to the paint squeezing, and I've had to fit them in a bit awkwardly here. My first observation is that the paints are noticeably runnier than professional paints, but this made them really easy to pour out. So I did this part very quickly by comparison to how long it usually takes me to squeeze paints into half pans. These little plastic pellets are actually pretty handy, and I got this particular one from Daiso because they usually sell them and they're pretty cheap, but they're also a decent quality. I left this palette flat like this for a few days to let them all dry, and they dried very quickly, so it's easy enough to close up the palette once the paint blobs are nice and dry. When I first received the set, I didn't actually realise that it was student quality paint and paper. At the risk of sounding like a horrible snob, I am so used to using professional quality products, it's actually really hard to go back to student quality. But I really tried to think about when I first started out and how would I actually like these paints? Are they good enough to begin with? And swatching that titanium white, it actually didn't do too badly across the black line. I'm going into the lemon yellow here and then the pale yellow. I do notice that the colours are not quite as saturated as professional paints, but they actually did pretty well overall. I think the colours I've struggled with the most are the earth colours. The yellow ochre was a little bit weak, but also the browns. Those were probably the weakest in the set. But the primary colours, the yellows, reds and blues, all did really well. And the scarlet red comes out nice and bright. I do love this colour in particular. There are some single pigment colours in this range, and the rest are a mix of 2 pigments each. That's actually pretty good. I've seen ones that have multiple pigments and they tend to get muddy very quickly. Oh yes, and one of the colours is out of order here. That orange vermilion colour should really be next to the orange yellow. Oh, that's not going to annoy me at all. Going to these 2 blues, cerulean blue and cobalt blue, these are both hues. They are not actually genuine cerulean or cobalts. I would not expect that to be the case in a student set anyway, but they probably should actually say hue at the end of them. They're basically mixes of titanium white and ultramarine or phthalo blue. So a lot of these are standard pigments that you will find in professional paints as well. But normally what they mean by student grade is that there is much less of a pigment load in here. So the colours aren't quite as saturated, and I think they probably used a little bit more gum arabic or other general filler. There was no chalkiness in these paints that I could notice though, so that is really fantastic. Sometimes a student quality paint will dry and leave a chalky finish on the top, and that's really horrible. These ones did not do that at all, so I'm very happy about that. So far the paper's holding up okay, although I did notice it is quite a lot rougher than the professional Baohong counterpart. But it didn't do too badly, and it is a noticeable step up from wood cellulose paper. Painting out these browns here, I struggled with them. I had to use quite a lot of paint to get any kind of darkness at the top of them. You can see how pale they are. These 3 browns were my least favourite in the set, and these will show up a little bit more in my upcoming paintings, but that black is awesome. I was really shocked at how dark that black is. I'll just lift them up now that they're dried. They're not super saturated in colour, but I think they are still pretty and they don't have any chalkiness. You can see quite a lot of texture from that paper. It is a lot coarser of a texture than what I would expect in a cotton paper. So I'm still on the fence about that. But here are the paints once they've fully dried, and they set pretty hard. There's definitely no honey in these. I also just spent a bit of time seeing how they would reactivate in water. They're okay, some of them re-wet more easily than others. The greens and the earth tones probably took the longest to reactivate. But now I'm going to do some actual paintings, but firstly I need to draw something. And I was thinking of the kinds of things that I would paint when I was starting out with watercolours, and I figured that a still life would be a good way to start off this session. Still lifes are great for all levels of artistic expertise, as you can go as simple or as complex as you want, depending on what the still life looks like itself. Here's the reference photo that I'm using for this particular picture. Nothing too super complicated. I found that on the free reference photos for artists page on Facebook. Totally worth joining that group. There are so many awesome pictures there. Once I finished sketching it out, I used a kneaded eraser to take off most of the graphite so it doesn't mess with the watercolours, and now I'm going straight in with the painting. You'll see me use a whole bunch of different techniques here, but I'm using the most basic one, wet paint on dry paper. I added darker colours on top of the lighter ones while the paint was still wet, just to get a variety of yellows in there, from light to dark. And I'm doing the same thing with the leaves, starting off with the lightest green and then going in with some darker colours just to blend it in together. I had to speed this up because it did actually take me quite a long time. This first flower here I did wet on wet, so I painted the water on first and then let the paint run over the top. far too blobby for my liking. The second technique, I put on thick paint and then I used water to dilute it out. That worked a bit better, and now I'm just going in with full-on paint, just slowly blending it out. And you can see how different all three of those flowers look. I am going to go over everything again with another layer. And now I'm painting in the glass bottle, leaving a few areas lighter so it looks like there's light shining through it and you get that glass reflection. So I've never really been a tutorial channel. I much prefer just to talk about painting rather than get into the details of every single technique out there. But I can say that using this set with beginners in mind, the paints, brushes and paper are all of a decent quality. And while they are most definitely not professional supplies, I was able to achieve quite a lot with these. The only issue with those browns, they just would not get dark enough and I was getting pretty frustrated. I ended up using the black to mix in with the brown, which gave me the darker value that I was looking for. The overall saturation of colour in the paints improved a lot once I'd done another layer as well. And the paper was starting to grow on me. It's still never going to be my favourite paper because there are just so many better cotton watercolour papers out there. But I can't fault it too much because it still behaved like a cotton watercolour paper should, just a bit less refined. Like the cotton fibres themselves feel a lot coarser than the beautiful soft watercolour papers that I tend to use. If you do end up trying the Baohong paper, you will notice a big difference in quality between these two, even though they're manufactured by the same company. But what I will say for this paper is it's nowhere near as frustrating as wood cellulose paper is. Cellulose paper will often dry really quickly and you get lots of harsh edges, you get a lot of cauliflowering with the paints, and it's just incredibly annoying to use. And of course, when you begin something, you do tend to start with cheaper supplies because you don't want to buy expensive stuff and ruin it all. But I've seen it with so many people that if their paper is not good enough, they'll just get really frustrated and give up on it. And I've been there as well. I've experienced that frustration firsthand. So my advice is, even as a beginner, it is always worth investing in some decent quality paper. More than the brushes and the paints, the paper is super crucial for practicing techniques and improving in your paintings. And I think if this was to be your first ever set, the paper is satisfactory, and you'll be able to use it without too much frustration, and then you can get frustrated instead over how hard it is to paint and draw. But I was actually pretty happy with how this turned out. I decided to not paint the whole background. I put some clear water on and flicked some paint in matching colours just to give it a bit more interest so it wasn't a plain white background. And the paint dispersed nicely into the water. That is once again due to the cotton paper. A quick signature and slicing it off once the paper had mostly dried, and here is the finished painting. I'm quite surprised at how bright the colours turned out to be, but I thought I'd really push the paper to its limits, and I'm using wet on wet technique here. I painted the left half with water and now I'm dropping in paints. I decided to paint a galaxy. That's also another thing that I did quite a lot of when I was starting out, and I still like painting them. You could probably see how well the paint is dispersing on the cotton paper. It seemed to work better in this picture than in the first one, and I used a lot of water here. The brushes themselves held quite a lot of water and paint too, which is always a great thing, and I decided to paint a second picture on the other side. I'm using a little bit of tape just to separate the two, and this one I'm doing more of a flat wash, starting off with red up the top and then moving down into oranges and yellows for more of a sunset look. The paint dispersed well, and here's the drying shift, which isn't too bad, but it really does need another layer, so I'm gently wetting the whole paper again so I can add in more colour and just get that really saturated. I wanted to leave that white space, which was totally unintentional, but it just looked amazing, and it really does have the look of a galaxy. I tried to preserve that white area as much as possible, and I'm just dropping in darker paints around the edges to give it more of a vignette look. Letting that set once more, and I'm going in with some paint straight onto the dry paper this time rather than dispersing it out. So it's kind of a wet on dry, but also letting the wet paint merge into each other. You can see how much more saturated this has become. So while the paper was still damp, I decided to try and add some of that titanium white in to see how much it would show up, and it's actually not too bad. What I was doing was flicking in stars, and once it fades, it gives it more of a natural look, so then I can paint brighter white stars over the top later once everything has fully dried. And you can see there how much the titanium has merged in with the other colours. On the right side, I am doing a little silhouette painting. I drew in a little bit of ink, but the rest of it's actually with the black watercolour paint. I am shocked at how dark and opaque it is. It is a really good black, and I will definitely be using that one in the future. It's a PBK 11. Which is usually a more granulating pigment than what I was getting in this particular paint. So I don't know what was going on there, but I just know that it is a really great black. And it held up so well when I was painting in this tree silhouette. It didn't fade too much. I think there were a few patches here and there, but I just went over those with a second layer and there was no problem. These sorts of paintings are so easy to do, and they're really fun when you're a beginner because you can draw any kind of silhouette. From something that's a lot more complicated or just a really basic thing like this, but even simple silhouettes look really effective. There is a nice variety of brushes in the set, and I was able to do a broad flat wash and then use some of the smaller brushes to do very fine lines for the branches. I did use a pen to draw in the birds and I still managed to stuff it up. Never mind, I just kind of added a few more flying around in the horizon, and it turned out okay. A little bit of grass down the bottom just to make it look more interesting. So now I'm going back to the galaxy and I'm painting on more titanium white paint, just to get those stars to go brighter, and I'm flicking them on with the fan brush. That's what I usually use fan brushes for. So for a white watercolour, I'm actually quite impressed with this one as well. It did fade once again, but I've used white paints in professional ranges and not liked them as much as I liked that one. I also used a bit of white acrylic ink to get the really bright highlights, just to add in a few more stars and make it stand out a bit. At this point, I was actually really happy with how the paper had performed. It did an amazing job for both of these paintings. The paint dispersed out really well with no cauliflowering or horrible harsh edges. It's a little patchy on the right, that may well just be due to me though. But here's how these ones turned out. Really bright and colourful. So here's the whole set once I'd finished with it. I talked far too long in this video, so I've sped everything up, but I thought you might like to see the palette once I was done. I really wish this set had included a palette like this. It's a crucial piece of kit, and I really hope that MEEDEN will include a small palette in the beginner's kit in the future. That's really my only criticism though. I think that the products they have included are really great quality. All of these brushes were good. They are looking a bit stained and worn here. I need to floof all of those bristles back into place once they've dried. But the bristles stayed put, they didn't fall out, and it's a decent quality brush set. This is my favourite thing though, I just love it. I am definitely going to be using this porcelain water dish in future videos. I'm pretty sure you can actually buy this on its own, so I think it's worth it if you just wanted to get that. The paper's decent enough, I don't hate it, and I do get picky over my paper, but really I would still use Bao Hong because it is just so much better. For an introductory paper though, and for the reasonable price, I think this is actually pretty decent. In fact, I'll probably end up giving the rest of the paper to one of my beginner watercolorist friends. Here's another quick look at the paintings in a bit more detail. You can see the colours are nice and vibrant. I'm not seeing any nasty chalkiness. The browns are not my favourite thing in the world, but they held up relatively well with a few layers and mixing in some of that excellent black. You can see there is a little bit of icky texture from the paper, which I'm not a big fan of, but water and paint dispersed nicely into it, just as a cotton paper should behave. Here's a quick reminder of all of the paint colours. I think I'll be giving away the paints with the paper as well, though I am tempted to keep some of the black because that's really good. And here are the other two little paintings that I did. A little bit patchy on the top right hand side there, but the galaxy one turned out really well. I'm so happy with how that looks. The paper seemed to perform really well with more water on it, which is quite interesting. But yeah, I just can't really fault any of these suppliers. They all turned out really well, so I'm giving this beginner set by MEEDEN a big thumbs up. I think it's great value for the price, especially having cotton paper and a ceramic water dish. I love that so much. I'm not giving that one away. But I just want to thank MEEDEN for sending me this watercolor set. It's been really fun to try, and I highly recommend checking them out, even if you just buy some of their accessories like the porcelain pot. They've got some quality stuff, and the prices are really reasonable too. So check him out in the links below, and thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, especially if you are a beginner watercolor artist. These would be some good supplies to consider. If you enjoyed my video, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up, and you might want to click the subscribe button for more future videos. I also have a couple of other videos you could check out here, which I'm sure will be watercolor related. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you all again in my next video. Swatch you later. Bye!